Introduction to worldview formation. A worldview is a structured set of beliefs and assumptions through which individuals interpret reality, make decisions, and derive meaning. It is not merely a collection of opinions, it is a system of interlocking commitments that shape how we answer fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, morality, and purpose. Core domains of worldview. Worldviews typically include foundational beliefs across the following domains. Domain key questions addressed. Axioms, what must be assumed to begin reasoning. Epistemology, what can be known and how. Meta-ontology, what makes a thing a thing. Ontology, what exists, what kinds of things are there. Metaphysics, what is the nature of reality beyond observation. Truth theory, what makes something true. Probability theory, how confident can we be in our beliefs. Theology, is there a God or higher power? What is divine? Cosmology, how did the universe begin? What is its nature? Metaethics, what is goodness? Is morality objective? Normative ethics, what ought we do? What is right action? Axiology, what is valuable or worth pursuing? Anthropology, what is the nature of humanity? Soteriology, what is salvation and how is it achieved? Teleology, what is the purpose or end of life? Grounding, what binds decision and action in the fundamental moral and philosophical principles, provides coherence across domains, ontology, ethics, epistemology. These domains form a conceptual lattice. Each influences and is influenced by the others. For example, your epistemology, how you know things, will shape your theology, what you believe about God, and vice versa. Logical dynamics in worldview formation. Question begging occurs when a conclusion is assumed in the premises. In worldview terms, this often happens when one domain, for example, theology, is used to justify another, for example, ethics without independent support. Question begging in epistemology and metaphysics. Claim, only physical things exist because science hasn't detected anything non-physical. Why? It begs the question. This assumes that science, an empirical method grounded in physical observation, is the only valid way to detect existence. But that conclusion is already embedded in the premise. It presupposes a materialist metaphysics and a positivist epistemology without independently justifying why non-empirical methods link. Introspection, reason, metaphysical inference should be excluded. Worldview dynamic. Here, epistemology, how we know, is used to justify metaphysics, what exists, but the epistemology itself is shaped by a metaphysical assumption that only the physical is real. The loop is circular unless the epistemology is independently defended. Defense strategy, coherent empiricism. This position can be defended by constructing a coherent epistemological framework that privileges empirical observation as the most reliable method for discerning reality. Here's how the defense might unfold. Epistemic reliability argument. Empirical science has consistently produced reliable, predictive, and falsifiable models of reality. Non-empirical methods, for example, intuition, revelation, metaphysical speculation, have not yielded comparably robust or universally verifiable results. Therefore, it is rational to privilege empirical detection as the standard for existence claims. 2. Operational definition of existence. In this framework, to exist means to have causal efficacy detectable by empirical means. If something cannot be detected, measured, or interacted with in any way, it is indistinguishable from non-existence. Thus, the claim only physical things exist is not metaphysical dogma, it is an operational stance rooted in pragmatic epistemology. 3. Burden of proof reversal. The defender can argue that the burden of proof lies on those who claim non-physical entities exist. Until such entities produce observable effects, they remain outside the domain of justified belief. This is not question begging, it is a default epistemic posture based on methodological caution. 4. Virtuous circularity defense. The reasoning may be circular, but it is virtuously circular. Empirical methods justify themselves through consistent success. The loop is reinforced by technological progress, predictive power, and explanatory scope. This coherence across domains epistemology, metaphysics, truth theory lends the worldview internal stability. Counter-reflection. Of course, this defense does not eliminate metaphysical possibility, it simply refuses to affirm it without empirical warrant. A pluralist might argue that this stance limits the scope of inquiry, but the empiricist would reply, better a limited map that works than a limitless one that misleads. Circularity. Not all circular reasoning is fallacious. We distinguish vicious circularity, a reasoning loop that fails to justify itself and collapses under scrutiny. I know God exists because the Bible says so, and I know the Bible is true because God wrote it. Virtuous circularity, a self-reinforcing loop that gains credibility through coherence, lived experience, and pragmatic success. I trust reason because it consistently helps me navigate reality, and reality confirms the reliability of reason. Contradiction. A worldview containing contradictions, for example, affirming both determinism and libertarian free will undermines its internal coherence. Philosophical rigor demands that worldviews be non-contradictory, even if they remain incomplete or probabilistic. Advanced concepts. Algology. The study of pain, harm, and suffering often overlooked in worldview formation. A robust worldview accounts for the origin, nature, and meaning of suffering. Symmetry breaking. Borrowed from physics, this concept models how small asymmetries lead to large-scale differentiation. In worldview terms, symmetry breaking explains how initial axioms or epistemic commitments lead to divergent belief systems. For example, the choice to prioritize empirical evidence over revelation breaks symmetry between scientific and religious worldviews. More often it uses one an analogy is given, but a morally relevant fact has changed between comparison situations. Modal factors in philosophy refer to concepts of necessity and possibility that qualify the truth of statements about what must be the case or what could be the case. We can also include truth semantics and hyperintentionality as we compare analogies. Modal example, necessity versus possibility. Statement, a necessity. All bachelors must be unmarried. This is necessarily true because it follows from the definition of bachelor. It's true in all possible worlds where the word bachelor means unmarried man. Statement B, possibility. It is possible that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe. This is possibly true. We don't know for sure, but it doesn't contradict known facts. It's true in some possible worlds, even if not in this one. Modal logic lens. Necessity. A statement is necessarily true if it holds in all conceivable scenarios. Possibility. A statement is possibly true if it holds in at least one conceivable scenario. Statement C, possibility. It is possible that artificial consciousness could emerge from sufficiently complex computation. This is possibly true. There is no logical contradiction in the idea that consciousness could arise from non-biological substrates. It is true in some possible worlds, even if not in our current one yet. We lack conclusive empirical evidence, but the concept is logically coherent and technologically conceivable. Modal framing. Possibility. Artificial consciousness exists. This means there exists at least one possible world in which artificial consciousness emerges. Statement F, possibility. It is possible that the word home refers to radically different realities depending on who hears it. This is possibly true. The term home is semantically simple, but hyperintentionality reveals its depth. It is true in some possible worlds, especially those where meaning is shaped by memory, culture, trauma, or longing. Hyperintentional layers of home. Listener hyperintentional meaning. A refugee, a lost place of safety tinged with grief. A child, a warm kitchen, a parent's hug. A philosopher, a metaphysical center of being. A soldier, a distant land, idealized and abstract. A person estranged from family, a site of pain or exclusion. Even though the word remains the same, its semantic payload shifts dramatically. This is hyperintentionality, the extra, often invisible, meaning carried by a term due to personal, cultural, or existential context. Modal tie-in. Possibility. Home means different things to different people. This statement is not just about linguistic variation. It is about how truth semantics and intentionality interact to shape meaning. Finally, we should use reasoning. Reasoning is the capacity of consciously applying logic by drawing valid conclusions from new or existing information, with the aim of seeking truth. Normative reasons. These are reasons that justify an action, indicating what someone ought to do. For example, A normative reason for staying indoors might be it is raining because it favors the action of staying inside. Motivating reasons. These are the specific reasons that an individual acts on. A person might be motivated to stay indoors because they are thinking about the possibility of getting wet, even if they don't recognize the normative justification. Explanatory reasons. These reasons explain why an action occurred without necessarily justifying it. For example, someone might have been motivated by the fear of getting sick, which explains their action, but it does not mean it was the best or most logical reason. Methods of philosophical reasoning. Deductive reasoning. This type of reasoning uses a general principle to reach a specific conclusion. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. For example, all planets orbit the Sun. Jupiter is a planet. Jupiter orbits the Sun. However, if the initial hypothesis was inaccurate, the conclusion would be as well. All planets have rings. Mars is a planet. Mars has rings. Inductive reasoning. This involves using observations to make generalizations. For example, concluding that it will likely not snow on a certain day because it has never snowed on that day in the past. Additionally, example, Felix is a cat. Felix is brown. All cats are brown. While this form of reasoning can be inaccurate, it can be used to develop a hypothesis for further testing. Abductive reasoning. This involves inferring the best explanation for an observation. For instance, concluding that a friend is jealous because that is the most plausible explanation for their behavior. Formal argument. Built from premises and a conclusion, often using symbolic notation. Evaluated for validity, does the conclusion follow from the premises, and soundness, are the premises true? Example in worldview modeling. Premise 1, all contingent beings require a cause. Premise 2, the universe is a contingent being. Conclusion, therefore the universe requires a cause. Informal argument. Uses natural language, analogies, examples, and rhetorical strategies. Evaluated for persuasiveness, clarity, and relevance. Example in worldview modeling. The universe feels designed like a finely tuned machine. That suggests a designer. How they interact in worldview formation. Formal arguments help clarify internal consistency and logical structure. Informal arguments help connect abstract ideas to lived experience, emotion, and intuition. A robust worldview often blends both formal scaffolding with informal narrative. Formal style defense of the claim. Only physical things exist because science hasn't detected anything non-physical. Argument. Empirical detection as criterion for existence. Premise 1. All things that exist must have observable effects or interactions. Premise 2. Science is the most reliable method for detecting observable effects and interactions. Premise 3. Science has not detected any effects or interactions attributable to non-physical entities. Premise 4. If something cannot be detected or interacted with in any way, it is indistinguishable from non-existence. Conclusion. Therefore, only physical things exist. Commentary on structure. Premise 1 operationalizes existence. To exist is to have causal efficacy. Premise 2 elevates empirical science as the epistemic filter. Premise 3 applies that filter to the metaphysical domain. Premise 4 closes the loop by defining non-detectability as non-existence. Defense of Premise 1, observable effects as criterion for existence. Premise A1. To meaningfully distinguish existence from non-existence, there must be some detectable difference between the two. Premise A2. Detectable difference requires that the entity in question has some effect, direct or indirect, on reality. Premise A3. Effects are only meaningful if they are, in principle, observable or interactable, even if not currently observed. Conclusion A. Therefore, for something to meaningfully exist, it must have observable effects or interactions. Commentary. Premise A1 appeals to epistemic clarity. If existence makes no difference, it is indistinguishable from non-existence. Premise. A2 links existence to causality. Something that exists must be able to do something. Premise A3 introduces the empirical filter. Effects must be observable or interactable to count as real. This argument doesn't claim that we must currently observe everything that exists, but that existence implies potential observability or causal relevance. It's a pragmatic stance that aligns with scientific realism and operational metaphysics. Worldviews aren't just inherited, they're engineered, tested, and refined. What we've explored here is more than a summary. It's a blueprint for understanding how belief systems form, evolve, and defend themselves across domains of logic, experience, and meaning. From axioms to algology, from circularity to modal logic, we've mapped the scaffolding that supports coherent worldviews and the dynamics that challenge them. Whether you're teaching, questioning, or reconstructing your own framework, remember, clarity emerges not from simplicity, but from the disciplined dance between structure and story. So as you step back into the world, ask not just what you believe, but why, how, and to what end. Because in the architecture of thought, every assumption is a beam, every contradiction a crack, and every reason a bridge. Keep building, keep questioning, and above all, keep your worldview coherent, courageous, and open to revision.